I want to bring in my man, the man of the hour, the man I really want to talk to, Professor Richard Wolff. I want to give your bio credit because you are fantastic. Professor Richard Wolff is Professor of Economics Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a visiting professor at the Graduate Program in International Affairs of the New School University in New York City. He is founder of Democracy at Work, fantastic program, by the way, and host of the nationally syndicated show Economic Update. His latest book, System is the Sickness When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. It is available with his other books, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism, at www.democracyatwork.info. Professor Wolff, you are the perfect person to talk to today. How are you doing? You doing okay?
Yes, I am. And let me start by thanking you. My head got twice as large by listening to very kind words you had to say.
You earned it. I've told you there are very few people who've affected my workable point of view. You've been one of them. And what I mean by that is Jack Fresco, you said it, Venus Project, workable point of view. It's like, how do you see the world?
Right.
And how do you weigh the world and those things? And you've been one of those people that has affected it. So I do appreciate it. Economic information is in. And apparently, Donald Trump's trade war is not doing the economy all that well. So in the fourth quarter, there was 2.4% growth. They expected 0.4% growth, and they got negative 0.3% growth. Now, that is a 2.7% drop. I pointed out, my humble self, who is not an economist, a month ago, that we are headed towards stagflation, that the tariffs are going to increase prices, the depreciation of the dollar is going to make things more expensive, and we are headed for a recession. And by definition, that is a stagflation. Regardless of what Jerome Powell says, that is stagflation. And the reports that are coming out today are effectively saying the exact same word, stagflation. Why didn't it work? Why didn't Trump's theory of the case work? And what I mean by that is, I would give Trump credit for maybe diagnosing a problem correctly. And maybe you disagree with it, but he looks at it and just says, okay, hey, we need more business. We need more manufacturing. We need to bring that stuff back. People don't have jobs. They're not paying enough. But then he says, so we need a tariff war against the entire world in order to fix that. Why didn't his theory of the case pan out?
Okay, there's several levels of answer to that. It's a great question. It's the right question to ask. What you just summarized is as good as I can do about where we are. And so let me try to answer, but I'm saying first, it's at different levels. Here's one level. When people are wrapped up in an ideological project, it's not necessary, but it can often happen that they begin to get so wrapped up in that project that instead of looking at the world to see how it's working and how that connects to their project, they begin to look at the world through the lens of that project, and then they see things very weirdly. So let me explain. One of the ways to understand the American problem is to notice that over the last 10 or 15 years, we as a nation have gone into levels of debt we had never gone into before, not even in wartime. And when capitalist countries like ours go to war, there's always the anxiety of the people at the top, who are the ones who declare war or not, the Congress, the president, and the people around them. They're always worried, rightly, that they who make the decision are going to turn around, demand that the mass of people do the fighting in a war, and discover, to their chagrin, that the mass of people don't want to do that because it hurts when there's a bullet goes through you, and they don't want that. And they've noticed, like anybody with half a brain, that the people who make the decisions don't do the fighting and vice versa. So there's an anxiety, and that plays out this way. They have learned don't ever fight a war and then go to the mass of people and say, a war is very expensive, so we have to raise the money to fight a war, right? We have to take hundreds of thousands or millions of soldiers from the United States to wherever the war is. That's very expensive. Then we have to feed them and clothe them there. That's very expensive. And they keep shooting guns and planes and missiles, and those are very expensive. So how are you going to pay for this? Well, they could go to the people and say, I'll give you an example. We're about to fight a war in Ukraine, or we're about to fight a war in Gaza, because the United States, as you know, provides the weapons and the money for Israel to do what it is doing. It could go to the American people and say, I'm here to inform you, we are about to go to war against Russia in Ukraine and against the Palestinians in Gaza. And therefore, we have to raise taxes. And so you're going to have to pay an extra $3,412.82, your family, and the next door family, they pay their shit. You know what would happen? The war would be over before it began. Americans would say, wait a minute. So the way you pay for a war is by borrowing the money. The government borrows the money so it can avoid taxing people, because that's too dangerous. And that's been done over. The war in Vietnam was paid for by borrowing. The war in Iraq was paid. The war in Ukraine, the Israel, it's all borrowing. And so the American government has been running what are called budget deficits. It borrows the money to fight those wars. It borrows the money to give the Defense Department all the money it needs to have all the military bases around the world, and the missiles and the bombers and the fill in the blank, because the whole country would have a very different attitude towards the United States government if they had to pay the taxes for what that government does. So we're in debt. And we keep going into more and more debt. In recent years, the debt of the government has gone up by trillions, with a T, trillions of dollars per year. 2 Mondays ago, something happened that didn't get a lot of attention, but it should have. It turns out that when the United States government borrows, it doesn't care where the money comes from. It just needs to get the loan. It's kind of desperate. Some of us have been in that moment in our lives where we had to get a loan and we didn't care where it came from. So the American government borrows from rich people who have money to give it, corporations who have money to lend, and foreign corporations and foreign governments. The largest single creditor of the United States is Japan. Americans don't understand. The Japanese government lent that money to the United States. The Japanese banks lent money. And you know, which may surprise you, the number 2 foreign creditor after Japan is the People's Republic of China. If you want a shorthand way of understanding their position in the world versus America, China is the second biggest creditor of the United States, and the United States is the biggest debtor country in this planet. We borrow. That's now. When the Japanese two Mondays ago came to the meeting where they normally come to lend money to the U.S. Treasury, which has its agents there, the Japanese said, we're not willing to continue to lend to you. Why not? Said the U.S. Treasury agents. And the answer, which they knew, because you're so deeply in debt, you have become a risky borrower. What that means is our debt, which, in case you're wondering, is in the neighborhood of $35, $36 trillion. Our annual output of goods and services is about 25, 26 trillion dollars. In other words, our debts have gotten into the 120% of our annual output. That's considered a dangerous level all over the world. So now you can get my response. Mr. Trump, he didn't cause all of this, but he's not innocent either. During the time of his first presidency, he ran deficits. The Republicans do, the Democrats do. That's the way our crazy politics works. The politicians don't want to tax corporations and the rich, fearing that if they do, those people will stop giving them the money that they need to run their campaigns. They're not going to tax corporations and the rich. But they can't tax the rest of us anymore either, because we're up to here. And if you hit us with more taxes, we'll never vote for you again. So they're stuck in our crazy system. They can't tax corporations and the rich, and they can't tax the rest of us because it's too politically dangerous. So what do? They borrow the money. Of course they do, because in that way, they can use the borrowed money to provide, a pension check to a Social Security grandma. They can pay for the next big missile. They can fight all the wars they want to, and they won't have to tax us. Does that sound crazy? Yes. Do we all live in that crazy? Yes. And we ought to face it. Now we're being forced to face it because Mr. Trump sits down with his advisors, and pretty much similar could have been done by a Democrat. I wish that weren't true, but it is. And you know it better than most. You see it all the time also. But in any case, Mr. Trump sat down and he came up with these two ideas. I have to come up with a way to stop borrowing as much as we do, because we're not going to find people to lend to us. And then where will we be? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this crazy businessman, Elon Musk, and I'm going to go tell him, go fire everybody you can find in the federal government, kick them out, close down their agency, stop spending any money. Number one. And number two, I'm going to come up with a way of getting more taxes, but I'm going to do it really clever. I'm going to call it a tariff, hoping people don't know that a tariff is a tax. And beyond that, I'm going to try to get foreigners to pay for it. That's as brilliant as his idea of getting Mexico to pay for the wall. That never happened either. This isn't going to happen either. The rest of the world is, if you allow me, showing us a middle finger, and that's going to come down the pike harder and harder. The United States is not in the position it was 50 years ago. We're not the ones who came out of World War II, the only powerful economy left standing in the rubble of the war. That was true back then, as not true now. We can't do what Mr. Trump is trying to do. It's not going to work. The rest of the world is not sitting there and folding its hand and asking what to do. Japan has been the closest ally you can imagine ever since World War II. And yet they told the Americans 2 weeks ago, we're not playing this game anymore. 3 days ago, there was an election in Canada, another one of our closest allies, and the people there voted a government that is also showing the same finger to Mr. Trump. Come on. If you're not blind, you see what's going on. And that's why we're going to have stagflation. We already do. We're having stagnation because every company, and this is really important, every company in the world is having to reorganize what it does, where it buys stuff in the world, where it sells stuff in the world, where it borrows money in the world. Why? Because trade with the United States is in chaos now. Nobody knows what they can sell here. It depends on how heavy a tax Mr. Trump puts on an electric car from China or a bottle of wine from France or a banana from Middle America. And these are changing so fast, and the uncertainty, because Mr. Trump not only does this weird stuff, but he does it one day, undoes it the next day, redoes it the third day. You can't, so everybody's holding back. Everybody is saying, no, don't invest now. Don't expand that factory now. Don't hire that extra 20 guys. Don't do that now. It's too uncertain. And when lots of businesses hold back, that's when you get recession, depression, stagnation. And if you're doing it at the same time that you're raising the cost of everything coming into this country, yeah, then you're going to get an inflation. The way I explain it to people is, if you're like me, this morning you had a cup of coffee, and into the coffee you put some sugar. Well, I got news for you. Coffee is imported. Coffee has to pay a tariff. So does sugar. Welcome to America, where your morning latte is going to cost you half your week pay. You know, I'm exaggerating, but the point is, you understand. And if you want to know why would Trump do this, if it's like the way I say, then this is the most important part of my answer. Because Mr. Trump's program should be understood as a program of desperation. This is not people quietly making an interesting plan for no. This is people throwing a Hail Mary pass down the field, hoping the right person grabs it out of the air. But there's no strategy here left. This is desperate. What are we going to do? If we can't borrow, we can't go to war. If we can't go to war, the American empire is over. I want to remind people, we lost the war in Vietnam. We lost the war in Afghanistan. We lost the war in Iraq, and we are losing the one in Ukraine. I mean, hello, pay some attention.
Yeah.
Those were wars that pitted the United States, one of the richest countries on earth, with probably the biggest military on earth, against some of the poorest countries on this planet. And we lost. You've got to understand, the whole world sees that. Americans may not think that's a problem, but everybody else goes, uh-oh, we better not rely on the United States, because that's a bad deal, and we're watching how that plays out. And look, I'm an American. I was born in this country. I've worked and lived here all my life. I feel very much an American. So I understand this is difficult. You know, for the previous 100 years, we were the empire going up, and it was a pretty good ride for an awful lot of people. We all remember, not all the people, not the African-American people, not the, they were left out. And that should never be forgotten. But for many, it was a nice ride up. Now the ride is going down. And you can see the people at the top, they don't want to give up anything that they got. So they're holding on. And that means the rest of us, we're going to have to pay the price of a declining empire. And that is no fun at all. What you're watching is Elon Musk destroy a huge range of public services that most Americans, one way or another, depend on. And that's a part of who's going to pay the cost of a declining empire. And in this system, it's the average middle and lower income people upon whom all of that burden is going to be put. And we're living through it. And the only question, really the only, and they know it in Washington, I can assure you. You know, I went to the same elite schools all those people did. I know them.
Yeah.
I know them. They know that the only ultimate question is, how much of this will the American working class, white, brown, and black, tolerate? How much will they accept? At what point will they say, no more of this? You're not taking away my student loan. You're not taking away my Medicaid program. You're not. You're not. You're not. And when they say, "Oh yes, we are," and the working people say, "Oh no, you're not," you know what that's called? That's called a revolution. And you may think that only happened someplace else. We are on the road, man. Will we get there? I don't know. I don't predict the future any better than anybody else can. But you are doing things in this country that are putting people, as we can see, against each other. And you're making everybody sooner or later realize, which side are you on?
Professor, from your mouth to God's ears, it just seems like there's an ideological difference in America that is not in France, it's not in Germany, it's not in some of these places in Europe, that Social Security is a handout, that it's an entitlement. Student loans are things that, well, I had to pay them, so you should pay them. Meaning it doesn't seem like there's an ideological framing for it. In fact, the ideology seems to go in the opposite direction, where it's, well, if I don't get it, it's a handout from the government, as opposed to governments can arrange themselves and support the populations if they want to support their populations. It's a ragged capitalistic country. I'll tell you, I was in what was it? I was in Cairo. I was at Kenya, actually, Nairobi, and I was at a casino, and I met this guy from Denmark, and he engages me in a conversation. He says, the way you guys do capitalism now, you screw over your workers. He says, we're a capitalistic country, but we pay our people, $20 an hour to work at McDonald's. Right. And he's like, we get buy-in from our workers. You guys don't. I don't understand how you do it that way. I met another guy from Germany, and I was getting healthcare abroad. And he says, how much are you paying for this? And he tells me, he says, my government pays for this. And, I'm sitting there like indignant, like, dude, I don't need to hear that. It's like these people are effectively telling me we arrange our governments in a way that tries to cover the working class in a way that in America you guys don't do, and not just don't push for, don't believe you deserve. Meaning, how does that, which side are you on, come into play if the American public doesn't even believe that government should function that way, should behave that way? I hope the question makes sense.
Absolutely. No, it absolutely makes sense. And your description is 100%. I've had those conversations myself. Let me remind you, my father was born in France. I speak French since I've been a kid. My parents were refugees. That's why I was born in America. I've lived here and worked here all my life. But I'm very, tied back into the European. My wife and I were once in France, and she got a pain in her tooth. And we went to a local dentist in a little village. And he took care of her. He worked about, I would say, a half an hour. And, she's in the dental chair lying back, and he's doing his thing. And then he fixed it. Very nice. No more pain. It was real great. And so we go into his office, and he says, because he could hear it from my wife, who she speaks French, but not the way I do. She didn't grow up that way.
Yeah.
So he says, I can see that you're not French. But here, he said, I'm part of the National Health Service. So when people come to see me, nobody pays me anything. I get a salary for being a dentist, and I maintain an office. And there are certain procedures that are more elective. And if you want that, then you have to pay me, and I do that. But most of my work is, taking care of people's normal dental work.
Yeah.
And he said, he says to us, in French, of course, he says, how much do you think you ought to pay me? So I start laughing, and I answer him in French, well, how much do you normally get? And then he explains, well, I don't normally get because I'm on a salary. And then we giggle, and he giggles, and he says, how about this? Would $15 be okay? So I smile to him, and I say, in the United States, for $15, he might let me use the ashtray in the waiting room. So he's not going to work on my teeth. Right. And he laughed, and he said, yeah, I heard that. He said, $15 sounds to me okay. I gave the man $15. He sent us on our way, and my wife's tooth problems had been taken care of. It's just a different, as you put it, it's a different way of thinking.
Right.
When it comes to Social Security, I really got to tell you, it blows my mind because it tells you how bad the indoctrination here is. Social Security should never have been called an entitlement. You pay for that.
I
Your
know.
whole life, money is withheld from your paycheck. You know that. I know that. I've seen it all my life. There's
Yeah.
a little FICA, and it says on the check they took out $182, whatever it was, each week to put into. So you're not giving me an entitlement. You're giving me back my money.
Yeah.
And and I accepted to have my wages reduced all my life to put that money aside so that when I get to be 65 or whatever it is, I have something to fall back on. But this is not an entitlement. You didn't ask me, am I happy to have money withheld from Social Security? My employer just took it because it was the law to do that. And I didn't say anything. None of my fellow workers did. So calling it an entitlement is already an ideological hustle. It's a
Mhm.
way of suggesting you don't really deserve this. Yeah, it's just charity
Yep.
helping you. And now let me put it the other way. The single biggest outlay of cash, unusual cash, over the last 2 or 3 years has been the government giving enormous amounts of money to corporations. For example, that once it became clear that the Chinese are developing computer chips as fast or faster than we are, and that those are crucial for the future of our economies, the United States got upset. Oh, we're not number one anymore. Hello, it's what we're talking about. So they decided to give a lot of money to corporations. Uh, Hello. What does the
Entitlement.
corporate? I mean, what? I thought we were living in a private enterprise. Either it's private or it isn't. If it's private, then it doesn't get government money.
Right.
And if you're going to give it government money, well, then what do the rest of us who provide the government with the money, what do we think about it? Either we live in a democracy where we have some say, or we don't. And I got news for you. We don't. So I mean, what? You know, you're holding it against the person who gets food stamps or who gets Medicaid. And meanwhile, you're giving vast amounts of money to people who don't need it. They're the corporations and the rich. They're the ones who need it least. And you're giving, whereas those who need it most, you're
Don't.
arguing about. This is upside down. This is Robin Hood in reverse. Instead of stealing from the rich to give to the poor, we live in a system that steals from the poor to give even more to the rich.
Last question. What could Trump have done when he got in? Meaning, as opposed to this fool's errand of, I'm going to roll back 50 years of globalization.
Here's what he could have done. Made America, stay with his slogan. Keep his red hat, MAGA, MAGA, make America great again. Here's a way he could have gone. He could have admitted to the American people what those of us that are economists know, that the single most important economic act of his first presidency, the 8 years ago that he was president, was the act that was passed in December of 2017. It was one of the biggest tax cuts in American history. It was mostly for corporations
Right.
and for the rich. You and I got a little bit so that we would think we were lucky. So we got $84.19 less taxes to pay, and we felt lucky. Meanwhile, the employer took his $80,000 saving, left all the way to the bank, stepped right over us as he entered the bank. Okay? That bill, because of the Democrats, did the Democrats fight that bill? Not much. Did they stop that bill? Not at all. Here's what the Democrats got. They got in the bill a provision that this law only applied for the next 8 years.
Right.
It
Sunset clause.
expires this year, 2025. So here's what Mr. Trump could have done. He could have stood up, and by the way, would he have become popular? You know what's happening to his popularity? It's
Yes.
going right into the circular bowl, all right, here's what he could have done. He could have said, my fellow Americans, I gave the corporations and the rich a spectacular tax cut. Every one of the last 8 years, they have paid way less. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars less in taxes because of the bill I gave them. Okay, that's a big enough gift to give to corporations and the rich. So I'm going to let that bill expire at the end of 2025, which means corporations and the rich will have to resume paying what they once did. We're making America great again, the way it was back in 2017. That would have brought to the government a massive amount of money. From whom? From the corporations and the rich, who had just gotten an 8-year gift.
Right.
They couldn't have squawked. He would have seemed to be a hero, and he wouldn't have had to do the rest of the crazy stuff Elon Musk and he are doing, disrupting the whole world economy. That would have been, if I was his advisor, that's what I would have told him. And that'll give you a clue as to why it is I'm not his advisor.
Professor Wolff, I always appreciate you, man. Always. Just to give you bio, Professor Wolff.
I think you and I are beginning to develop the capacity that we ought to go out on the trail and be a duet.
Well, look, you are always appreciated here. I always appreciate having you. I always appreciate these conversations. The audience loves these bits. Professor Economic Emeritus, University of Massachusetts Amherst, and visiting professor at the graduate program in International Affairs of New School University, New York City. He's founder of Democracy at Work, host of the nationally syndicated show Economic Update. Again, fantastic show. Definitely check it out. His latest book is System is the Sickness. Actually, you may have a later book. This might be old, but I'll read it anyway. System is the Sickness: When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, and is available with his other books, Understanding Socialism and Marxism, at www.democracyatwork.info. Professor. Oh, and by the way, where can people find you? They can find you on Twitter at Professor Wolff, Prof Wolff.
Yep, and YouTube, just go to democracyatwork.info. That's our website, and you can find everything there that we do.
Very cool. Thank you for this. You be safe, okay?
You too, and I hope to talk to you again in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye-bye. All right. Professor Wolff, he came. He's fantastic. Perfect day for him to come, especially with the economic news that we're having. I had to dance a little bit until he got here, but fair enough, he got here. So God bless.